Hello students, this lesson is about sentence structure. Part 1, identifying simple and compound sentences. To start with, what is a sentence? A sentence is a group of words that forms a complete thought. Every sentence has at least one independent clause, which can stand by itself. That means that it can be its own sentence. It will be a complete sentence by itself. Every sentence ends with either a period, that would be for statements, a question mark, that would be for questions, and an exclamation point, which is for statements that you want to make with lots of expression and feeling. What is a clause? A clause is a group of words that includes a subject and a verb. So a simple sentence has one independent clause. It has one subject, which is a noun. It's who or what the sentence is about. If it's who, it's a person, or what is a thing. But that one noun, whether it's a person or a thing, it's what the whole sentence is about. It's the subject of the sentence. And then the verb is what the subject is doing. The verb could be an action verb, something like walking or talking, but it could also be a state of being verb, such as just saying that something is something, such as he is a policeman. You could say I am, and then you say what you are, or he is, or we are. So these verbs here help us express when something is in a state of being. It's just in the state of it. It's not so much doing anything, it's just in a state. So we have two kinds of possible verbs, the action verbs or the state of being verbs. Either way, they're both verbs. And remember that a clause has a subject and a verb. So birds is the subject, fly is the verb. So if we were to diagram this sentence to show its structure, we would put the subject here on this side of the dividing line. And then we put the verb on this side of the dividing line here, and this shows the structure of this sentence. Here's another simple sentence that only has one clause. All simple sentences, by the way, only have one clause. So we have Tom is sleeping. Tom is the subject. So we'll put the subject here. And is sleeping is the verb. So we'll put that over here. It only has one clause. It only has one dividing line. On this side we have our subject. On this side we have our verb. Here is another simple sentence with one clause. Shula is a photographer. So Shula is the subject. And is the verb. We'll put is here. This line here is our dividing line. Now, if we wanted to go further and diagram the rest of this sentence, we would put photographer over here because it's the predicate nominative. This slanted line here is slanted because it's pointing back to Shula, because the predicate nominative is referring to Shula. But that's not what this lesson is about, so we won't say anything more about that. I'm going to put the A underneath photographer because it is being used to talk about the photographer. It's actually an article. Anyway, the structure of this sentence shows there's only one clause. There is the subject noun, which is here, and then there's everything on this side, which goes with the verb. So once again, you can see that this sentence only has one clause because it only has the one dividing line. It's important to realize that subjects and verbs can be either simple or compound. What is compound? Well, compound means having two or more parts or elements. So it just simply means something has two parts to it. You can have two or more subjects doing one verb, that means using the same verb. For example, Max and Alex played ball. Max played ball. Alex played ball. So since both Max and Alex are sharing this verb here, if we have our dividing line, we would have to put it right here. We would have to put it between these two subjects because they're both sharing this one verb. They're both doing the verb here. So our dividing line would go here, and that would be one clause. This subject would have two parts, but it would still be only one clause. Or you could have one subject doing two or more verbs. You could have just Max, just one subject. Max sang songs, so he did this verb, and played ball. So Max also did this verb. Since he's doing both of these verbs, our dividing line would go here, and we would have a compound verb. But we would still only have one clause because we only have one dividing line here. This sentence has a compound subject. Birds and bats fly. So we have birds and bats, they're both part of the compound subject, and then we have fly as the verb. We would organize it on a diagram like this. Okay, we just have a simple sentence here because it only has one clause. We have everything on this side of the dividing line being our subject. We have everything on this side related to the verb. So we're still only dealing with a simple sentence that has one independent clause. An example of a sentence with a compound verb. We have birds fly and sing. So birds is the subject, and fly and sing are both part of the compound verb. So we'll put them both on this side of the diagram because the birds are doing both. They're doing both the flying and the singing. So they need to be together on this side. So this whole thing here represents the verb part, and over here represents the subject part. Since we only have one dividing line here, we know that we're still dealing with a simple sentence. Even though we have a compound verb, we still only have one clause here. And a simple sentence can have both a compound subject and a compound verb. It's still a simple sentence because it only has one independent clause. So here we go. We have birds and bats. We have two elements of our subject, birds and bats. And what do the birds and bats do? They fly and eat. Both the birds fly and the birds eat. The bats fly and the bats eat. So everybody over here is sharing the verbs over here. That's why we need to put them on the diagram like this to show that they're all sharing. And so this is still a simple sentence because it only has one clause, it only has one dividing line here. Now it's important to understand that sometimes the verb is a phrase with helping verbs. Okay, the helping verb goes with the main verb to make one verb phrase. Verb phrases are not compound verbs, even though they have more than one word. Okay, you can have two words that go together in the verb, but this is still just one verb. It's a verb phrase, but it's just one verb. It's not a compound verb. The am in the phrase is the helping verb, and eating is the main verb. Here are some other helping verbs. The state of being verbs can be used as helping verbs. And then we have verbs related to have, to do. We have conditionals here. These can all be part of verb phrases. Sometimes they are not. Sometimes these verbs are by themselves. But when they are in a verb phrase like this, then they function as a helping verb. This sentence is a simple sentence because it only has one dividing line here between the subject over here and the verb and words that are related to the verb over here. Now, let's talk about compound sentences. A compound sentence is different from a simple sentence, okay? It's a sentence with two or more independent clauses joined by a conjunction. So some sentences have more than one independent clause. If so, it is called a compound sentence. For example, birds fly and fish swim. Here we have one clause. This is one independent clause. But we're going to connect it to another one. Here's another one. With the two being connected by a conjunction, we call it one sentence. However, it's a compound sentence because it has two clauses, two independent clauses. It has this clause and it has this clause. Because this sentence has two independent clauses, this one and this one, we call it compound. So when we want to diagram this sentence, we would put the birds with fly. That's this first clause. It has the dividing line here. And then we would put the and in between. It's the conjunction that connects this clause with this clause. Then we put the subject of the second clause here and the verb of that clause here. So you can see we have two dividing lines because we have two clauses. Therefore, we have a compound sentence. Here is another example of a compound sentence. The students walked to the classroom, but the teacher was not there. So we have students walked. This is one clause. And we have teacher was. This is another clause. So we can diagram it like so. We have our students here. What did the students do? They walked. We have our conjunction here, which is but. It's going to connect the two clauses together. Then we have our teacher here as the subject of the second clause, and we have was as the verb of the second clause. So that's another example of a compound sentence.